Good afternoon to everybody, and it gives me a great honor and pleasure to present our keynote speaker of this afternoon, Kristalina Georgieva. Kristalina, apart from being a very good friend, I must say, she has been the director of the IMF since October 2019, and before joining the fund, she was the CEO of the World Bank from 2017 to September 2019. And she has done many things, so it's so long, her CV is so wonderful. But one of the things I want to highlight indeed is that she helped to shape the agenda of the European Union, and also as Vice President for Budget and Human Resources, she was deeply involved in the efforts to address the euro area debt crisis and the 2015 refugee crisis. I think these are things to highlight. Today, she's also the co-chair of the Global Commission on Adaptation to Climate Change, and as co-chair of the United Nations Secretary General High-Level Panel on Humanitarian Financing. Kristalina, what a privilege to have you with us here, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Alicia, for a very generous introduction, and I must say from my heart that the very first thing that you said, that we are good old friends, was the best of the praises you have given for me. I am extremely grateful to the Pontifical Academy of Social Sciences for inviting me to be part of the seminar today. It is a very important discussion, and as we have heard from Joe Stiglitz, from Jeff Sachs, from all who have spoken, we are dealing with some of the most pressing issues of our time. How can we benefit from the strength of our economy for everyone, and how can we address the most difficult, the most challenging issues of our times together? So the question I am asked to address is, what are the new priorities for the global economy? And I would like to start with a short answer in the words of the Holy Father, who was just with us. Pope Francis said, the first task is to put the economy at the service of people. And this, to my mind, is a beautiful description of the world we want. And it is the world we need if we are to meet the challenges of the 21st century. It also speaks to the fundamental purpose of leadership, leadership in public service, leadership in the private sector. In the world we need, we are all called upon to be ministers in the original sense of this word, serving not ourselves, but serving others, with an open mind and with a kind heart. We need to be fair to the world we have, because a lot has been achieved. We have been transformed over the last decades by global integration, by cooperation, by incredible technological advances, more often than not in service to humanity, and yes, by many sound economic policy choices. And as a result, over the past decades, child mortality has fallen by half, and more than 1 billion people have lifted themselves out of extreme poverty in the world we have, in the world today. These are remarkable achievements. They are unprecedented in human history. But if you are one of the 700 million people still living in extreme poverty, this progress means nothing to you. if you are one of the 172 million people jobless, not by choice, but because they are deprived from a dignity of a job, this progress means nothing to you. So we need to recognize that the world we have, our economy, has cast some dark shadows. Excessive inequality. We heard it from the Holy Father. We all know that since 1980, the top 1% globally has captured twice as much of the gains from growth as the bottom 50%. Many developing economies, especially countries affected by conflicts or natural disasters, are no more catching up with the advanced economies. Some of them are actually falling further behind. And the current economic structure is harming our natural environment, is putting the future of our children at risk. And it is not surprising, therefore, that in this context, a recent global survey tells us that more than half of respondents said capitalism is doing more harm than good. And the implications are alarming: declining trust in traditional institutions, rising political polarization, social tensions. So the question is, how can we lift these dark shadows and bring in more light? How can we have an economy that is at the service of people? And I want to outline 3 areas of action. This is what my institution, the International Monetary Fund, is embracing with determination. First, inclusive growth, helping countries foster a culture of solidarity, something that we heard from Joe about. Second, integration, promoting globalization of hope, not of despair. And third, climate action, caring for our common home. So let me start with inclusive growth. And I want to first talk about Latin America, because this is the region most represented here. Credit should be given where credit is due. Latin America has made quite a significant progress in reducing excessive inequality. We know the region was a champion. It has done, in many places, better. But we are still not at the point when we can celebrate that this tide of inequality has really turned. And we have talked in the previous session about unrest in the region, and there was a agreement in the room that the root cause of unrest, first and foremost, is inequality. I heard some saying not poverty, but inequality. And it is not coincidence that this discontent erupted in places where the gap between rich and poor is too high, where growth is too low to deliver better opportunities for those who need these opportunities the most. Many who consider themselves middle class are left with growing fears that gains could be reversed, that they could be moving back towards the shadows of poverty. And if Latin America is to meet these challenges, it does have to nurture this culture of solidarity that rebuilds trust and recognizes that a sense of dignity that comes with good jobs, reliable public services, and stronger social safety nets. This is what people expect to see. And that the best way to nurture solidarity, in our view, is to concentrate on one particular aspect of inequality, inequality of opportunity. And that means investing in people, not just spending more on schools and training, but improving the quality of education, turning into reality lifelong learning, bringing the private sector with a sense of responsibility for reskilling and upskilling workers as technology changes the nature of work. Very important not just to spend on social programs, but to allocate this spending more effectively to reach the most vulnerable and move to, we were talking actually yesterday about that, move to this new generation of social protection programs that are not so much just about social safety nets, but they're about social safety ropes, helping people to help themselves so they can have the opportunity of self-reliance. We know that when these policies reduce the inequality of opportunity, then with it comes reduction of income inequality. We have seen in our research, and Minister Herrera spoke about that, not only we have the economic benefits of stronger growth, faster and stronger, more sustainable growth when inequality is down, but we create social cohesion that helps that nurturing of solidarity to take hold. We have to be fair that many of the countries, Latin America, and not just Latin America, are faced with very tight space for spending. And many would be saying, okay, how to do that? How to invest more when we are in very tight fiscal position? And we can work together both on looking at how we can raise more, and I will come to this point of actually collecting the taxes that are due, but also how to improve the quality of spending, how to make sure that every peso or every dollar, every cent can be stretched further by higher quality of public expenditures. Our goal is to ensure that policies deliver for people. And we at the IMF actually have been working quite a lot on social spending. We have made that part of our DNA, our programs. For policies to succeed, they also have to be inclusive in other respects. They have to be inclusive in terms of making sure that women are not only part of the labor force, but they're treated equally and they're paid equally for the job they do. Where is Jeff? So just to make sure that we are correcting Aristotle on that point. The aspect for us that is hugely important in being fair is also to look at market concentration in job creations, entitlements that need to be addressed at all levels, and have the courage to actually deal with them. Above all, in my view, in Latin America and other parts of the world, there is plenty of room to fight against the darkness of corruption. Corruption hinders growth, it hollows out the economic and social foundation. It feeds into growing discontent, especially among young people. And to do something very important, if we are to have more money to spend for people, to address relentlessly the extensive tax avoidance and tax evasion. Globally, the number is staggering. Globally, in offshore financial centers, there is about $7 trillion, 8% of global GDP. And a sizable share of this wealth comes from illicit activities, from tax avoidance. These are problems that we need to work together to address. Neither countries on their own or international institutions on their own can succeed, but if we work together relentlessly, we can turn the tide on tax avoidance. Our analysis shows a very serious problem with choosing low tax destination to cut taxes. Non-OECD countries And most, not all of the Latin American countries are non-OECD countries, lose about $200 billion a year because companies are able to shift profits to low-tax locations. And that is what erodes the ability to take decisive action to serve people to meet the Sustainable Development Goals. Beyond culture of solidarity within countries, we need global culture of solidarity. And that takes me to this notion of globalization of hope. We have seen in recent years what I call globalization blues. We are all disillusioned, globalization is not popular, but we are so interdependent, we need each other. We need each other more today than we needed each other 20, 50, 100 years ago. What we see, however, is that while income inequality between countries has been reduced, income inequality within countries, including advanced economies, has increased. And many have pinned this to be the fault of globalization. So we do need to recognize where we have been coming short, especially in terms of who wins, who loses from globalization within countries, and be sure that we are honest about the efforts that have to be made, especially when technology so quickly changes the allocation of work. That is a problem for every country, but if we are to be thinking together of how to address this problem, we have a better chance to sort it out. I don't have to go any further, but just to mention two things that are happening in front of our eyes. One is the coronavirus spreading, two, climate disasters like the forest fires in Australia. To make the point that we are in a more fragile world. Yes, as Pope Francis said, it is a richer world, but it is also a more fragile world, and it requires for us to find solutions together to be more effective in this world. To my mind, we have to make sure that we do hold on our interdependence that is best demonstrated through open, fair trade. Improve the global trade system so it can continue to deliver for all, for people everywhere. I am also very keen to see that we do not give up on international cooperation in any form, and in that context I asked the question about data. Can we move towards international cooperation that allows us to harness the wealth of data in a fair and inclusive manner? We have to recognize that this would be only successful if all systems, including the financial system, deliver. And yet, what we have seen is that financial integration sometimes comes with significant risks. Joe has spoken and written quite a lot on capital flows. Here are the facts. Over the past 4 decades, global capital flows have increased 13 times compared with 11 times increase in trade. In other words, money moves faster than goods. And if we are not to have a fair regime of capital flows that safeguards countries against abrupt departure of capital, then we are not doing our job. And I just want to say to Joe, we take very seriously high capital flow volatility that can hurt financial stability and the prospects of businesses and households. And we are taking at the fund our job to continue to work on how we can have policy environment that is promoting financial cooperation and integration, but is protecting against the risks of abrupt departure of capital. Remember 2018, there was outflows from emerging markets. Brazil and Malaysia used significant amounts of foreign currency reserves to shore up their currencies. Colombia and South Africa barely intervened. Some raised interest rates, others didn't. We have to be smarter in how we draw lessons so we can be more effective collectively in this area. The Holy Father also talked about debt sustainability. It is very important to be done in a way that promotes financial integration, promotes us being one global community, and at the same time, it protects the most vulnerable people. It protects nations from falling off the cliff. And I think we have to be all together in coming up with policies that are very simply, that are building this collective responsibility, that make trade and finance more inclusive and capital flows safer. And that is when we can have globalization of hope rather than globalization of anxiety, which is what we see today. And that globalization of hope we need particularly when it comes to our planet. We are at a very critical time in our history as human race. We have put excessive pressure on our precious Mother Earth. And it is absolutely paramount that we take responsibility to correct our actions. We know that the human and the economic costs of climate disasters are already excessive. Unfortunately, they fall on the poorest, on the poorest countries and on the poorest people most heavily. So what is it that we can do at the fund? How can we lift the climate shadow that is hanging on our humanity? So we are determined to act on two fronts that are in our area of competence. First, fiscal. Come up with fiscal policies on price of carbon. Joe, we are in agreement with you in your report. In that regard, we actually came up with $75 a ton price of carbon, preferably in the form of taxes, the most efficient way to generate incentive for decarbonization. We are very determined to work with governments to help them look at their fiscal policies with an eye to move gradually towards an appropriate level of carbon tax. And of course, we are very keen to work with countries on the spending side. What is the best use of public investments to stimulate decarbonization and climate resilience, and to bring the private sector into play, because the private sector that is going to make the biggest difference. Our second area of focus is hugely important. It is to work on climate-related financial risks. Our institutions, for those who don't know the IMF so much, the IMF is dedicated to secure financial stability in the world. However, with climate crisis, we are seeing two factors of destabilizing the financial systems. One is the so-called transitional factor, transiting from high carbon to low carbon sectors. In the European Union, there is now a Green Deal that by 2050 would move the EU to be carbon neutral. Well, financial institutions that are holding assets that are high carbon assets, they need to look into that, because over time they would be turning from assets into liabilities. And some estimates suggest that the potential cost of devaluing these assets is somewhere between $4 and $20 trillion. Clearly a growing financial risk. And on the other side is the impact of climate disasters on financial institutions. If you are holding investments in a disaster-prone area or sector, obviously with climate risk growing, these investments are becoming more problematic. We want to be the institution that helps create standard reporting on climate-related financial risks and move the financial sector from voluntary to, over time, mandatory reporting on these risks, so we can stress test banks the same way we stress test them for example, for bad loans in their portfolios, for non-performing loans. We are strong promoters of green financing. President Hoyer of the European Investment Bank and the World Bank have a long-standing challenge, which is the institution that was the first to issue green bond. President Hoyer would say us, and then Mr. Van Trotzenberg may say us. Doesn't really matter. What matters is that, President Hoyer, it matters. It's you. Let's give it to you. What matters is that from a very niche product, green bonds are now becoming more mainstream, and we would like to create the appropriate incentives for financial institutions to move in that direction very rapidly. So these are the three areas where we as institutions are committed, and we are taking very concrete steps to move the world to be more inclusive, more integrated, and certainly with higher sense of responsibility for the future of our planet. I think we would be often seen as an institution that is strong-minded, but I want to assure you that we are strong-minded, we are also soft-hearted. And that is not your grandmother's IMF anymore. I want to finish with a quote from Lev Tolstoy. He wrote in Anna Karenina, "All the variety, all the charm, all the beauty of life is made up of light and shadow." Pope Francis brought us here together in that balance of light and shadows, to have more light dispel the shadows. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Kristalina. You certainly gave us a very good overview of your